End of discussion, you know? And now these humans need to adapt and they need to get real. And they're not being real. They're living in this fantasy land if they think that they can continue treating their resources this way, right? It's heading toward catastrophe. Yes, Tyler.
What about the VCR Blu-ray argument?
The what argument?
VCR Blu-ray argument. So it's like dams are VCRs and solar power is Blu-rays. Nobody's really, everybody is on the noodles for solar power right now. So we might as well just jump on ship.
Well, there was an intermediate step in DVDs.
Well, you know what's interesting is that the grid, by the way, in general, upper watershed dams are a lot less ecologically destructive. Isn't that interesting? I mean, down in Eugene, they have these dams up on the near the head, both on the Mackenzie and also then they have Lookout Point and Dexter Dam on the main stem of the Willamette up there. And compared, and then there are no dams in the lower Willamette at all, right? But compared to, for like this dam right here, does far less ecological damage than these dams down here, right? These dams affect every single salmon population upriver, right? Whereas this dam only affects one salmon population, or two maybe at the most, right? So upper watershed dams in general are ecologically much safer and sounder than lower watershed dams. Yeah. Or Tyler, what was your question again, or your point?
Was the dams are old. Get out with the old, in with the new.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and what I was going to point out though is that the energy grid, the electricity grid, right? It can only take so much energy, right? I mean, it has a capacity. You can only transmit so much energy, right? And what happens when there's more? Now they have all these wind turbines in the gorge, right? If you drive through the gorge, you see a lot of turbines now. And what do you suppose is the first power source to get shut down? First power generating source to get, the first power generators to get shut down when there's too much electricity in the grid, guess what? They shut down the wind turbines, right? Right? So we have an excess of power generation right now. We're generating more power than the system that we built can transmit. Oh, but the problem with upriver dams, by the way, though, where are the industries located that want to use electricity?
Downriver.
They're way down here, right? And guess what? For every mile that you transport kilowatts of electricity, you lose, right? You lose. So the farther you try to send that power, the less, right? The more you waste, right? It escapes. All that crackling, when you go underneath those high power. I'm sounding like an idiot.
No, that actually is the thing.
Then they're escaping, right? And so anyway, so that's the tragedy, right? I mean, this is not where our aluminum smelters are. Thank goodness we don't want an aluminum smelter in the Rocky Mountains. We want them way down here, right? And so it makes more sense from an industry point of view to build dams on the lower river, right? Because it's closer to industry. So isn't that sad? Yes.
Two things. So an aesthetic argument for keeping the dams is that the speed of the river would increase. Then you don't have the Savi's Nude Beach anymore because the water is too fast, so nobody can.
Oh, come on now. Savi's Nude Beach, you will not even Rooster Rock would be affected. That's all the lower river, dude. There are no dams on the lower river. The whole 90 miles of the lower river of the Columbia is all undammed, right? It's all estuary. This is estuary.
So removing the dams wouldn't increase the speed of the water?
What's that?
So removing the dams wouldn't increase the speed of the water? Because you had mentioned that at some point.
It would increase the speed of the river up here, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it wouldn't change the speed of the river down here.
And then the other thing was, so the logic for putting them in the first place was to create a surplus of jobs, like temporarily, basically. But you can use that same logic for a reason to take them down, because that creates a surplus of jobs too.
There are no jobs. How many jobs? I don't know.
Well, it's the construction is
the construction. You need temporary jobs. Yes,
yeah.
Yes, they're make work projects.
So the
You're right,
deconstruction is a make work project as well. So you can use the same logic for them being there to get rid of them.
Exactly, and one thing that really fascinated me was that a few years ago, in fact, it was the 50th anniversary It was 2007. It was the 50th anniversary of the submergence of Celilo Falls. You notice I don't say destruction, but because the falls are still there. They're just underwater, right? So all the rocks that form, the basalt formations that form the channel for those falls are all intact. For a while, there was a rumor that they had been dynamited by the Corps of Engineers when they were building the Dalles Dam, but that isn't the case. And we know that now because the Corps of Engineers conducted a sonar map, a sonar survey, and they mapped the entire floor of this reservoir, of the Dalles Reservoir. And you can go online and see that, the sonar map that they generated, and they show that all the rock formations are still there and could be restored. And so what's and the Army Corps, someone interviewed a spokesperson, a newspaper reporter interviewed a spokesperson for the Corps of Engineers, and the Corps of Engineers said, the reason that we conducted this survey of the floor of the reservoir is because we know that there are valuable cultural resources there, resources that are valuable to the tribe. And I thought to myself, why is he even saying that? If somebody is not contemplating, at least the possibility, right? Because those aren't resources under the water there, unless the dam is removed or significantly drawn down. You could theoretically, but the reason they put the dam there is it's this huge power generating. This guy it's just a beast, right? Produces so much power, right? Because the water falls, right? That's where the river falls. And falling water, the more water falls, right? The farther it falls, the more power you can generate. So if they were to lower that reservoir, which they could do, they could keep the dam in place, but just lower, right? But then they would have to replace the turbines in there. Isn't that interesting? Because the turbines are designed with the giant head, right? A lot of weight. So if they were to lower that big reservoir, then they would have to replace those turbines, and that dam would not be able to generate the amount of power that it currently generates. These are both just really big power generating dams. This is a new one, fairly new. This was finished in 1964. And this one's finished in 1957. This is 1932. And then the last one was this one here, and this was finished in 1975. Anyway, so that's kind of what it all comes down to, really. The power of lobbyists, the power of, mainly of those barge company lobbyists, and what some environmental historians have described as the iron triangle. The 3 points of the iron triangle are high-powered politicians in Washington, and then federal agency administrators, like in the Corps of Engineers, right, who are political appointees. And then the third point in the iron triangle is the industrial extractive interests. So the iron triangle, right, comes together in this case. Political corruption feeds, the administrators who are appointed to the Corps of Engineers, right? There's a slush fund. They have anyway, it's all political corruption that keeps these dams in place. It's not sound policy. It's not enlightened thinking. It's not careful calculation of costs and benefits. It's political corruption, really, that keeps these dams in place. And our waterways are being used, right, to generate profits for a tiny sector of our economy at taxpayer expense, by the way. So if they do that Tesoro Savage Oil Terminal, then they're going to get oil from up in here, right? This is North Dakota. The Bakken Shale, way over here somewhere, and they're going to put it on rail and send it by rail across the Rocky Mountains down here to the Tri-Cities area, I guess right around in here, and then they'll send it on a rail all the way through the Columbia Gorge, all the way down to Vancouver, where they'll put it on oil tankers, and then they'll send it right off to China. And that's what they have in mind for our natural resources and from our socialist dams, right? Well, they don't need the socialist dams because they just want to bring that through rail on rail projects. Thank goodness nobody's talking about barging this fracked oil. But at some point they might try to do that too, right? Just start barging this fracked oil right down the river. But the oil trains, of course, are dangerous enough, and a single accident will befoul our river and our salmon runs. And they want to put at risk, right, that whole section of our continent, right, at risk in order to get their filthy product out to market, a filthy product which does, enormous harm when it's burned, when it's refined and burned too. And this is the dirtiest possible oil too. That fracked oil is not. It's
I thought that tar sands was the worst.
tar sands is the worst. You're right. Tar sands is.
Second.
Yeah. All these methods of extreme energy extraction are just extremely harmful, though. No deep ecologist. What's wrong with you people? Nobody signed up to be a deep ecologist? Couldn't one of you? Anyway, I'm sorry. Shouldn't be decrying. That's all right, you know.
You can be the deep ecologist.
What's that?
You can be the deep ecologist.
Maybe. No, we'll find somebody. Aren't you guys excited about deep ecology? Come on. No? You don't like that real crunchy stuff?
They're jerks.
What's that? They're jerks?
Yes.
Well, they're a very diverse group. We can't. It is interesting, though. You know, someone might observe that they're jerks because they, you know, they just took it upon themselves to be judge and executioner and identify culprits, you know, evil resource users, right? And they took it upon themselves to just condemn them and go torch their stuff, right? And that's kind of jerkish behavior. You're right. But what's interesting philosophically is that, right, people were correct to identify them as kind of, if we're going to put them somewhere on my natural resource values wheel, yes, they belong up there at about 10 or 11 o'clock with the neo-Kantians, right? And they seem to be non-consequentialists, you know, who are saying that there is a moral order that is reflected in ecological understanding of the universe, and that moral order puts hard and fast, binding, non-compromisable obligations on the human being. And our culture is sick and twisted and diseased and is not living up to those responsibilities, not even close, not even trying. It's been corrupted and sickened by this, you know, some kind of thought virus that has caused it to treat everything in nature as though it's an object, right? And we know better now, right? We know better. Ecologists have taught us better now. And so, anyway, but from that neo-Kantian point of view, somehow, in their philosophical lack of sophistication, these jerkish, some of them perhaps might have been jerks, I don't know, but they were able to justify the instrumentalization of other living beings, which is what you do when you take it upon yourself to burn stuff down, right? You're instrumentalizing people. And that is, interestingly enough, totally at odds with all the rest of their philosophy, isn't it? So, that's why they could have benefited, you know, from studying a little bit of philosophy, but then they wouldn't have been the kind of people, you know, we get shit done, right? It's the way they thought, right? They get shit done, you know. To hell with these abstract ivory tower intellectuals like Professor Mulier. He's over there going on and on about intrinsic values. We're over here getting shit done, right? We're torturing, you know, we're taking the battle, right, to the enemy, you know, right? But it's inconsistent with their neo-Kantian orientation. They said, no compromise in defense of Mother Earth and no harm to any living being. No harm to any sentient being. Right? And yet they were able, because, as I pointed out, they view natural resource disputes as through the lens of warfare. Right? They believed that they were combatants in war. And by committing an eco-sabotage is analogous, right? Their kind of eco-sabotage was really extreme, right? I mean, they went way beyond monkey wrenching. But they viewed their political actions, right, as being analogous to the political actions, for example, of a French nationalist in World War II, right, who's resisting the damn Nazis, right? They've taken over, right? A lot of these Earth Firsters and environmental liberation fronters and animal liberation fronters, that's how they understood themselves. They understood themselves as combatants against an occupying army, right? An occupying army of timber companies and oil companies who are taking the lion's share of natural resources that belong to all of us, right? And since our agencies, our government agencies that are supposed to watch out for us and watch out for these resources, since they've all been bought off, they've all been captured, they've all been corrupted and co-opted, then we have no choice, right? We tried that, they would say, right? They said, we tried that. We tried working through the system, and the system is so corrupt that we couldn't accomplish anything that way. And meanwhile, species after species after species is going extinct, right? And these disasters are unfolding. So what are we going to do? Anyway, we're going to get radical, is what they said. That was their answer. We're going to get really, 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 really radical, and we're going to start justifying, right, instrumentalization in this narrow sense. Right? They thought it was narrow. They never injured or killed anybody, right? But they certainly caused a lot of economic distress. Yeah. So anyway, it's just, you know, just kind of interesting to note all that. And that might have been their fatal flaw, right? But then what, you know, what would they have done then, right? I mean, thinking that there was a war going on, you know, so what do we do as environmentalists today? Honestly, I don't really know. I don't really know. I mean, we have so many other, you know, we got Trump or Clinton, you know, I mean, that's a problem right there, isn't it? I mean, how can a country of 300 million people just produce these two? I don't know. It's just, isn't it weird? What is wrong with it? Well, we know what's wrong. You know, it's totally corrupt. And you know, President Obama has, you know, for all of his other, you know, some of his policies seem to have been fairly progressive, but environmentally, it does seem to be that environmentalism is largely ignored nowadays by our federal government. I mean, compared to 30 or 40 years ago, you know, in the heyday of environmental legislation, I can't think of a single thing that Congress has done. You know, every now and then the executive will set aside some more, another national monument, but we've crisscrossed our country with oil trains and pipelines, and basically we treat our natural resources the way that a banana republic does. You know, I mean, it's really appalling. For whatever, you know, other ways that our federal government might be somewhat more progressive as far as natural resources are concerned, we've gone way, way, way backwards. And anyway, that's one thing that a lot of environmentalists point to about dam removal, is that it's a positive, it's something that they can take part in. It's a movement that's actually doing something positive, and instead of constantly being on the defensive, right? They removed, a few years ago they removed that dam on the Little White Salmon River. You guys followed that, didn't you? No? Let's see, Condit Dam is what it was called. And this could be done, and it will be done eventually. You know, I mean, our legacy, what will the alien anthropologists think, you know, if they come along this, what the hell are these big, giant concrete things doing in the water, you know? Anyway, Condit Dam, all right, let's, and then we'll get out of here, all right? Let's go ahead and see what they did to Condit Dam. This is a pretty big dam. It's not as big as the Lower Snake dams, but it's getting there. You know, it's on the way. And the next, every dam that gets removed, right? They took out. This actually was the largest dam in the river, but only for about 9 months. We had the record, right? Not us. It was in Washington, right? The Little Salmon River flows into the Columbia River right about near Stevenson, I think. Anyway, kind of across the river from the Dalles, actually. And the dam was only 6 miles up. I think 6 miles from the confluence. They built this big dam, and it was old. It was 100 years old. And so what happened was there happens to be an endangered salmon run, as pretty much every salmon run in the Columbia Basin is endangered. So the federal government told the utilities company that operates this is a privately operated dam, right? And they told the people who operate this dam, they said, you have to put a fish ladder on your dam or you need to take it out, you know, because we got these endangered fish over here. So anyway, they decided, after looking into how much it would cost to retrofit their dam with a fish passage facility, they decided to remove the whole thing. So this ended up being, because it was decrepit and aging anyway, and evidently it wasn't generating a whole lot of power, so they decided to get rid of it, which is really kind of cool. And in this instance, they had the, someone want to get the lights over there? They used dynamite. They blew it up from in here. You'll see it in just a minute when I started. And that's because there was all this silt behind the dam. 100 years of silt had accumulated. And so they decided to blow the whole thing up, and all that silt just got blasted out of there. And now, this was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And if you go there now, it's just a beautiful place. There's a beautiful slot canyon. It's all revegetated. The concrete part after it was all drained.
The black stuff that came up, you didn't know was all the silt that come up?
That was all that silt, yeah.
Ugh.
That silt all ended up on the Columbia. It all got washed out into the main river, right? And it actually formed a bar that used to be there the whole time. So the sandbar that used to be there has now been restored to where it was. Noticed by Chief Johnny Jackson. I was talking to him, and he mentioned that. I said, yeah, it's sandbar. I got to meet him at this, anyway, he's one of those he remembers fishing on the Columbia River prior to the construction of any dam. Imagine that. He's in his mid-80s now, but he fished on the Columbia before Bonneville was even built. He's chief of the Cascades. The Cascades community is now centered at an in-lieu site on the north side there. I forget, anyway. But yeah, go ahead.
Wouldn't releasing all of that silt at once destroy like existing spawning sites and everything that have like the gravel along the bottom?
Well, that what we just saw was the reservoir. You know, yeah, it looked terrible. It was terrible. But that was 4 years ago, and I'm told that 2 years ago, my friend went there and he said it was all beautiful. The silt was all gone, and I think last year or even 2 years ago, they noticed salmon coming up there. So the salmon are already going up there and spawning. I don't know if they can spawn right there in that muddy area, but they can go beyond there. So yeah, salmon will recolonize. That's the thing. You got to appreciate these animals. They are tough little buggers, and they just want to go. They just want to go spread all over the place. So who knows? But within 2 or 3 years of that dam coming out, there's salmon going back up in there. They really, it's just amazing. Yes.
They had the reservoir full when they destroyed the dam. What happened if they emptied the reservoir first? Like,
Well, I
there
think
had been,
that's
like, less
normally how they
washout.
do it, but I think in this case they blasted it all out like that because they wanted to get that silt out of there. I don't know. There are various other, you can, like I said, we only held the record, they only held the record for about 9 months, because 9 months later, 2 dams on the Elba River were taken out that are even bigger than Condit Dam. And so, anyway, we're getting there, and the next big dams that are going to come out are going to be on the lower snake, and those administrators are finally going to have to bite the bullet and admit that they made a big mistake. Let me ask this question about the Dalles Dam and about the 4 lower snake dams. If those sections of our river were still free-flowing today, and the proposals for the Dalles Dam and the 4 lower snake dams was presented to us today, would our society build those dams? Does anybody think that our society would if they were being considered today?
Yes.
You think they would be constructed today?
I think given the amount of climate change that's going on and people's need for clean energy,
That's a good
I
point.
think that people would try to offset the amount of coal, and seeing as both Bonneville and those dams
That's a good
collectively
point.
probably generate a significant portion of our electricity for the area, I think that
Several
people would
gigawatts.
choose to absolutely dam those up and
Okay, what about-
utilize that type of electricity.
Now the last of the 4 lower snake dams was completed in 1975, right? And most historians, most environmental, what you're raising is a very interesting point having to do with knowledge of anthropogenic climate destabilization and need for non-greenhouse gas emitting power generation, right? And that's something that people in the last 5 or 10 years are more aware of, right? But in 1990, I think I'm very confident in saying that the Dalles Dam would never have been built if it had been up for consideration in 1990. And the 4 lower snake dams, it's the consensus among environmental historians is that the 4 lower snake dams were barely snuck in under the environmentalist movement. They barely made it in time. And that because that was the end of the line. The great dam building era came to an end, not only because locations for dam sites were exhausted, right? But also because there was tremendous public outcry against the devastating ecological effects of dams, right? And that's what people considered. And so the general consensus among historians is that the 4 lower snake dams were constructed at the last possible minute. And the Corps of Engineers knew that. And that's why they pushed to have those dams built, because they knew that their window of dam building was closing. All right? And as for Celilo Falls, you know, are we really that cynical about our society? If Celilo Falls was still active today, at least 13,000 years of continual use and inhabitation, right? Would our society, really, because of anthropogenic climate destabilization? You think so?
Without a doubt.
Our society would say to hell with this ancient way of life?
Not the whole society, but the ones in charge.
Is there still that much racism?
No, there's that much power that few people hold. That they would say, okay, we'll do it because it would make us that.
Do you realize that Celilo Falls was the #1 tourist attraction in the Pacific Northwest until the day that it was inundated and submerged? It was a very popular place. That's how you know an old school Oregonian.
And now-
Because they'll tell you about how their family would always stop at Celilo Falls when they went on a road trip.
But that wasn't putting any money in anybody's pockets. How much money is going in people's pockets now because those dams are up? A lot. So that's what it's all about. It's not as deep as the whole ecosystem.
It's funny you say about money though and tourism. I mentioned tourism. It was a popular tourist, and I don't know. I guess they didn't have to pay any admission, did they? They would just park their cars. Sometimes the Indians made them put a rope on if they got a little too close, but they'd park and just stand and watch. It was really cool. It was an amazing thing to watch. These Native Americans with their dip nets. It was this amazing choreography, right? And the mist and the rainbows in the mist and the roar of the falls. It was spectacular, absolutely spectacular to be there. And, but no, no, absolutely not. No society after the 1960s would ever have committed such an affront against indigenous people, ever. I don't think so. I mean, not even in South America. I don't know much about
Let me
them.
tell you about Brazil.
And what about China?
But you're talking about a cultural resource. Celilo Falls is actually a World Heritage Site. It's been declared a World Heritage Site by the United Nations, even though it's under 60 feet of water.
Three Rivers Dam in China. Like they just built a dam. They just built a new one. Like so.
That was incredibly controversial.
They
And
still
they had-
built it though.
They displaced how many millions of people?
And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter to these people how many people you displaced or anything like that. All they care about is the money.
One would hope that the United States has a bit of a more democratic system for determining resource policy than China. Maybe we don't. I don't know. Maybe they have a more democratic natural resource policy system over there, but I suspect that ours is probably still a little more democratic. And so, I don't know. Would Three Gorges Dam be approved in a more democratic society if it wasn't for, some autocratic government saying this is what we're going to do? I don't know. And aren't we a little better than that? I mean, aren't we a little, don't we have a country whose military admits that it maybe made some mistakes, you know? Like the Corps of Engineers could maybe admit that they made a mistake because they thought that we could have fish in power too, but that was an error. And so now they realize the fish are so valuable, you know?
We still think 9/11 was committed by terrorists.
Oh,
Come on, no, so that's where we're at. This is how, that's where we're
Why
at.
are we talking about this?
That's where
We
we're
don't
at.
need to talk about 9/11. But
Stop the breakaway in, man.
anyway, I stand, you know, I don't think the 4 lower stake dams will be built because the cost-benefit analysis is just terrible, all right? But I don't know, man. And we're clearly in an extreme situation that I don't know. I guess what, you know, the vital needs of the planet. Is that the argument? The vital needs of the planet dictate maximizing hydropower resources?
No, I think that people's fear of the vital needs of the planet dictate power resource, and I think politicians would respond to the fears regarding climate change by trying to greenlit as many what we dub as renewable energy projects as possible. And I think that it's exactly what you said earlier. You gotta kill the one to save the many. And I think it would be a legitimate like item. And I think that people would like say that the tribes, the influence onto the tribes by climate change would be worse than the influence onto the tribes by flooding out Bonneville. I think that'd be a legitimate argument that somebody would make. And I think that for the most part, the Corps of Engineers is not a bad entity. I think that it runs off of a very specific set of regulations that are imposed by Congress and by what are voted in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Congress votes in the vast majority what we as humans want. And the Corps of Engineers is charged with trying to balance the need for growth with the need for environmental sustainability, often through mitigation, and demanding that companies come in and provide a alternative mitigation plan or a way to pay back the environment as much as possible, as dictated by the regulations that Congress imposes.
I was gonna say, I don't think Congress does anything that we want.
There are regulations that have been set in standard for years and years and years that any changes to them have to go through Congress, and the Corps of Engineers operates off that very specific book.
Are you
So we've got to go finally give up the dream of salmon preservation and salmon restoration. Is that it?
Absolutely not.
But that's exactly the result of leaving the Ford. You're saying that the decision would be made, and so it seems to me that you're making an empirical claim. You're not saying this is my policy recommendation. You're saying something empirical about the nature of the American public. And how the nature of the American public is such that the American public would simply conclude that development